Do you know who I am?" she screamed when I asked her to stop blocking the office entrance. I stood there, briefcase in hand, watching this woman completely lose her mind over a simple request. "Yeah, by the way, I'm your boss," I replied calmly. She laughed like I'd told the funniest joke she'd ever heard, then pulled out her phone and called security on me. 3 months of remote work had kept me away from the office, but I never expected my first day back would start with my own employee having me escorted away. My name is Charlene, and 3 months ago, my life changed completely when Meridian Industries acquired the consulting firm where I'd spent 8 years climbing from junior analyst to senior partner. The acquisition came with an incredible opportunity. Chief Operations Officer at Meridian, reporting directly to CEO David Walsh. At 32, I'd be one of the youngest C-suite executives in the company's history. The transition period required me to work remotely while integrating our client portfolios and restructuring operations. I'd been living and breathing spreadsheets, merger documents, and video conferences from my home office in Chicago, while the Meridian headquarters buzzed with activity in downtown Minneapolis. I'd built my career on merit and determination. Starting as a fresh graduate with a business degree from Northwestern, I worked 60-hour weeks, took on projects nobody else wanted, and slowly proved myself in a competitive industry. When other people went home at 5, I stayed until 8. When others complained about difficult clients, I found solutions. That dedication paid off when I made partner at 29, the youngest in our firm's history. The woman blocking the entrance was Brandy, something I'd seen her name on organizational charts but we'd never met face to face. All our interactions had been through email, and even those were minimal. She managed mid-level operations in the marketing division, a department I'd be overseeing once fully integrated. Monday morning at 7:30, I'd finally made the drive to Meridian's headquarters, excited to meet my team in person and start implementing the strategic changes we'd been planning. The building was impressive. 23 floors of glass and steel in the heart of the business district, with the company logo gleaming in bronze letters across the facade. But there was Brandy, planted right in front of the main entrance, gesticulating wildly at a delivery worker who was trying to bring packages into the building. Her voice carried across the plaza as she berated the poor man about delivery schedules and protocol. A small crowd of early arriving employees had gathered, looking uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. "Excuse me," I'd said politely, approaching with my briefcase and laptop bag. "Could you please step aside? People need to get into the building." That's when she exploded. The security guards arrived within minutes, 2 older men in crisp uniforms who clearly knew Brandy well. She pointed at me dramatically, explaining how some random woman had been harassing her and disrupting business operations. Her performance was Oscar-worthy. Trembling hands, tearful eyes, the whole production. "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us," the taller guard said, not unkindly but firmly. "We need to sort this out." I tried explaining who I was, but my corporate ID badge hadn't been processed yet. That was on my to-do list for later in the morning. My executive parking pass was still being prepared. Without proper identification, I was just another person making claims. "I'm Charlene Morrison, the new Chief Operations Officer," I said, pulling out my phone to show emails from David Walsh. "I can call my assistant to verify." "Sure you are, honey," Brandy interrupted with a laugh. "And I'm the Queen of England." "Officers, this woman is clearly having some kind of episode." The guards exchanged glances. They'd probably dealt with their share of people claiming to be someone important. Brandy, meanwhile, stood there in her perfectly pressed blazer and pencil skirt, looking every inch the professional executive she claimed to be. "Let's just head to the lobby and get this sorted out," the shorter guard suggested, gesturing toward the building. I found myself being escorted inside while Brandy followed, her heels clicking triumphantly on the marble floor. The lobby was elegant, all marble and mahogany, with abstract art pieces and comfortable seating areas. But I wasn't there to admire the decor. I called Tracy, my assistant, who nearly dropped her coffee when I explained the situation. "Oh my God, Miss Morrison, I'm so sorry. I'm coming down right now," Tracy said, her voice tight with embarrassment. "Your ID should have been ready last week, but there was a delay in processing." Within 5 minutes, Tracy appeared in the lobby, out of breath from running down 12 flights of stairs. She immediately vouched for my identity, showed the guards my photo in the company directory, and explained the administrative delay with my credentials. The guards were mortified. "We're so sorry, Miss Morrison. We had no idea." "Don't worry about it," I said, genuinely meaning it. "You were just doing your job. No harm done." But as we talked, I noticed Brandy watching from the elevator bank, that same satisfied smirk on her face. She'd gotten exactly what she wanted, a public humiliation of the new COO. Even though the guards now knew who I was, the damage was done. Other employees had witnessed their senior executive being escorted away like a troublemaker. Something in her expression told me this wasn't a misunderstanding or a case of mistaken identity. This was intentional. This was a power play. And as I watched her disappear into the elevator, I realized that Brandy was going to be a much bigger problem than I'd anticipated. The morning that was supposed to mark my triumphant arrival at Meridian Industries had instead begun with my own employee publicly undermining my authority. But I hadn't climbed to the C-suite by backing down from challenges. If Brandy wanted to play games, she'd just chosen the wrong opponent. By 9 a.m., I was settled into my new office on the 19th floor, but the morning's incident lingered in my mind like smoke after a fire. Tracy had prepared my schedule: back-to-back meetings with department heads, a lunch with David Walsh, and an afternoon session reviewing quarterly reports. Normal first-day activities, except nothing about this day felt normal anymore. The office itself was impressive: floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Minneapolis skyline, a mahogany desk that could seat 8 for meetings, and built-in bookshelves lined with industry publications. But despite the executive trappings, I couldn't shake the feeling that Brandy's morning performance was just the opening act of something much larger. My first meeting was with Robert Chen, Director of Finance. Robert was soft-spoken and meticulous, the kind of person who noticed when numbers were off by even a few cents. As we reviewed budget allocations, I casually mentioned the morning incident. "Oh, you met Brandy," he said, his tone carefully neutral. But I caught something in his eyes, a quick flash of recognition, maybe sympathy. "You know her well?" "Well enough," Robert replied, then quickly redirected the conversation to projected quarterly earnings. The same pattern repeated throughout the morning. Marketing Director Lisa Park mentioned some challenges with cross-departmental communication when Brandy's name came up. Operations Manager James Wright physically winced when I asked about team dynamics in his division. Human Resources Director Jennifer Martinez chose her words very carefully when discussing personality conflicts in the workplace. Each conversation felt like stepping on broken glass. People would start to say something, then catch themselves. Glances were exchanged, subjects were changed. It was like trying to discuss a family secret at Thanksgiving dinner everyone knew, but nobody wanted to be the first to speak. During my lunch with David Walsh, I decided to address the elephant in the room directly. "I had an interesting encounter with one of our managers this morning," I said as we sat in the executive dining room on the 22nd floor. David was in his early 50s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, the kind of CEO who'd built his career on reading between the lines. "Brandy," he said immediately, not even needing me to elaborate. "You know about this morning?" David sighed, setting down his fork. "Word travels fast around here. Charlene, I want you to know that what happened this morning was completely unacceptable. Brandy can be challenging." "Challenging how?" "She's been with the company for 2 years, technically competent, hits her numbers, but—" David paused, choosing his words carefully. "There have been some concerns about her management style. Nothing that's risen to the level of formal complaints, but concerns." "What kind of concerns?" "High turnover in departments where she has influence. Good people requesting transfers. Some employees seem reluctant to speak up in meetings when she's present." David met my eyes. "I've been hoping that new leadership might help address some of these cultural issues." Translation: the problem was real, significant, and had been going on for a while. But nobody in senior leadership had been willing to tackle it directly. The afternoon brought more revelations. During a break between meetings, Tracy approached my desk with a concerned expression. "Miss Morrison, I hope this isn't inappropriate, but there's something you should know about the office culture here." "What do you mean?" Tracy glanced around nervously, then closed my office door. "Some of the administrative staff have mentioned concerns about working with certain managers. Nothing official, just casual conversations. But there seems to be a lot of stress in some departments." "Which departments?" "Anywhere Brandy has oversight or influence," Tracy said quietly. "I've heard that some really talented people have left the company rather than deal with working conditions in those areas." That afternoon, I decided to take a walk around the office floors, ostensibly to introduce myself to various teams. What I discovered was telling. In departments where Brandy had no influence, people seemed relaxed and engaged. They chatted easily, collaborated naturally, and welcomed my impromptu visits with genuine enthusiasm. But in areas where Brandy held sway, the atmosphere was different. People were quieter, more formal. They answered my questions politely but briefly, as if worried about saying the wrong thing. I noticed employees glancing toward Brandy's office before speaking, even when she wasn't there. Around 4 p.m., something interesting happened. A young woman named Madison approached my office, then hesitated in the doorway. She was maybe 25, with the kind of earnest expression that reminded me of myself at that age. "Miss Morrison? I'm Madison Taylor, Junior Marketing Coordinator. I just wanted to welcome you to the company." "Thank you, Madison. Please, come in." She entered nervously, clutching a folder against her chest. "I was wondering if maybe sometime you might be available for a quick meeting about some ideas I have for improving our client outreach programs." "Of course, let's set something up with Tracy." Madison's face lit up with relief, as if she'd expected to be turned away. "Really? That would be amazing. I've been trying to get a meeting about these ideas for months, but..." She stopped herself abruptly. "But what?" "Nothing, never mind. Thank you so much for your time." She practically fled from the office. I found Tracy right after Madison left. "Has Madison Taylor been trying to schedule meetings about her ideas?" Tracy checked her computer. "I don't see any requests from her in the system. But let me ask around." 20 minutes later, Tracy returned with interesting information. Madison did try to schedule a presentation about client outreach improvements. She submitted the request through her supervisor, who reports to Brandy. The request was denied as not aligned with current strategic priorities. When was this? 3 months ago, and again 6 weeks ago, and again last month. A pattern was emerging, and it wasn't pretty. Talented employees were being silenced, their ideas buried, their careers stalled. Meanwhile, Brandy was positioning herself as the gatekeeper, deciding who got access to senior leadership and who didn't. Just before 5 p.m., as I was packing up for the day, my phone buzzed with a text message. Except it wasn't meant for me. Someone had accidentally included me in a group text meant for another employee with a similar name. The message read, "New Ku seems different from the others. Think she might actually listen? Or is she just another one of them? Check the survival mode chat tonight. Want to hear what everyone thinks." Survival mode. That was a name I hadn't heard before, but it sent a chill down my spine. It sounded like employees had created their own support network, their own way of coping with workplace stress. And if they were discussing me in terms of whether I was one of them or someone who might actually listen, it meant they'd been dealing with leadership that neither listened nor cared. As I drove home that evening, the pieces of the puzzle were starting to form a disturbing picture. Brandy wasn't just a difficult colleague or an isolated personality conflict. She was at the center of a systemic problem that was affecting multiple employees, stalling careers, and creating a toxic environment that drove good people away. The morning's confrontation hadn't been about blocking an entrance or a case of mistaken identity. It had been a test. Brandy was establishing dominance, showing everyone watching that she could humiliate even senior executives without consequences. But she'd made one critical miscalculation. She'd assumed I was like previous leadership, either unaware of the problem or unwilling to address it. She'd assumed wrong. Tomorrow, I decided, the real investigation would begin. Tuesday morning arrived gray and drizzly, matching my mood as I drove back to Meridian Industries. I'd spent Monday night researching everything I could find about workplace toxicity, hostile environments, and how to properly document misconduct. If Brandy was creating the kind of problems I suspected, I needed to approach this systematically and professionally. My first stop was Jennifer Martinez's office in Human Resources. Jennifer was in her 40s, with the kind of calm competence that came from years of handling delicate personnel situations. Her office walls were lined with certifications in employment law, conflict resolution, and workplace safety. "Jennifer, I need to understand something about our company culture," I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Yesterday, I started hearing concerns about management practices in certain departments." Jennifer's expression didn't change, but I saw her shoulders tense slightly. "What kind of concerns?" "High turnover, employee stress, difficulty getting ideas heard through normal channels. I'm wondering if there's a pattern in our personnel records." "I can pull some data for you," Jennifer said carefully. "What specifically are you looking for?" "Let's start with employee retention rates by department over the past 2 years. Then maybe transfer requests and exit interview summaries." Jennifer nodded, making notes. "I can have that for you by this afternoon." "Anything else?" "Yes, I'd like to review personnel files for any managers who have multiple departments reporting through them, particularly in marketing and operations." By noon, Jennifer had compiled a stack of reports that painted a disturbing picture. 3 departments under Brandy's influence had turnover rates of 38%, nearly double the company average. In the past 18 months, 7 employees had requested transfers specifically to get away from those departments. 5 more had left the company entirely. But the exit interview summaries were the most revealing. Employee after employee cited management style differences, lack of growth opportunities, and workplace stress as reasons for leaving. Several mentioned feeling that their ideas weren't valued or that they were being set up to fail. One particularly damning report was from a former marketing specialist named Ashley Williams, who'd left 6 months earlier. "I felt like I was walking on eggshells every day. Any suggestion or question was treated as insubordination. I was given impossible deadlines, then criticized when I couldn't meet them. When I tried to explain the challenges, I was told I was making excuses. I loved working for Meridian, but I couldn't continue in that environment." Another exit interview, from operations analyst Mark Thompson, was even more specific. The manager in question seemed to take pleasure in publicly correcting people and making them feel small. Team meetings became interrogation sessions. "I watched good people get beaten down until they stopped contributing ideas altogether. I finally realized that no job was worth that kind of stress." But the most shocking discovery came when I started digging into performance reviews. Brandy had been writing scathing evaluations for people whose work I could verify was actually excellent. Madison Taylor, the young woman who'd been trying to schedule meetings about her ideas, had received a review that described her as lacking initiative and resistant to feedback. Yet her actual project outcomes were consistently above average. Jennifer and I sat in silence for several minutes, reviewing the documentation spread across her conference table. "Jennifer, how long has this been going on?" "The pattern started about 18 months ago," she said quietly. "Around the time Brandy was promoted to her current role." "Have there been any formal complaints?" Jennifer hesitated. "No formal complaints. A few informal conversations where people expressed concerns, but nothing anyone wanted to put in writing." "Why not?" "Fear of retaliation. People worried that filing a complaint would make their situations worse." I spent the rest of Tuesday afternoon conducting my own investigation. I requested access to Brandy's personnel file and discovered something that made my stomach drop. Her resume claimed she had an MBA from Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management, my own alma mater. But when I called the alumni office to verify, they had no record of anyone by her name graduating from any program. Further investigation revealed that her claimed MBA was actually from an unaccredited online program that had been shut down by the Department of Education for fraudulent practices. Her previous senior management experience at a consulting firm was actually a coordinator position at a small nonprofit organization that had closed 2 years ago. Brandy had been living a lie for 2 years, and somehow it had never been properly verified during the hiring process. But the deception went deeper than fake credentials. I discovered that she'd been systematically sabotaging talented employees by giving them impossible projects with unrealistic deadlines, then documenting their failures in official reviews. 3 promising employees had been passed over for promotions specifically because of Brandy's negative evaluations that contradicted every other indicator of their performance. The most heartbreaking case was Madison Taylor. Madison had developed a client retention strategy that could have saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. But instead of presenting it to senior leadership, Brandy had buried the proposal and given Madison a performance review that questioned her strategic thinking abilities. Meanwhile, Brandy had been building her own reputation by taking credit for other people's work. Projects that succeeded were attributed to her leadership and vision. Projects that failed were blamed on subordinates who were difficult to manage or resistant to guidance. Around 4 p.m., Tracy knocked on my office door with a concerned expression. "Miss Morrison, I thought you should know word is getting around that you've been asking questions about departmental performance and employee satisfaction." "Oh?" "Brandy has been telling people that the new COO doesn't understand the company culture and that all this questioning shows you're not committed to the team," Tracy said nervously. "She's been suggesting that your 3 months of remote work proves you're not really invested in the company's success." I felt anger building in my chest, but I kept my voice calm. "What exactly is she saying? That you're looking for problems where none exist? That you're trying to make changes just to justify your position? And," Tracy hesitated. "And what?" "She's been telling people that the acquisition team doesn't respect the existing company culture and that you're just here to clean house and bring in your own people." It was a clever strategy. Brandy was positioning herself as the defender of loyal, long-term employees against an outsider who was looking for excuses to make changes. She was creating an us versus them narrative that painted me as the threat and herself as the protector. But she'd made a critical error. In her eagerness to discredit me, she was inadvertently revealing that she saw me as a genuine threat. That meant she knew her behavior wouldn't withstand scrutiny. As I drove home Tuesday evening, I realized that this situation was far more serious than a personality conflict or cultural mismatch. Brandy had created a systematic pattern of abuse that was destroying careers and driving away talented people. She'd built her own reputation on the foundation of other people's destroyed confidence. But she'd also made a fundamental miscalculation about me. She thought I was just another corporate executive who would accept surface explanations and avoid difficult confrontations. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Wednesday morning brought the weekly all-hands meeting, a tradition David Walsh had established to keep everyone aligned on company priorities and strategic initiatives. The main conference room on the 20th floor could seat about 80 people, with additional overflow seating available via video conference for remote employees and other offices. I'd spent Tuesday night preparing my presentation on post-acquisition strategic initiatives. The slides covered everything from operational synergies to new client services, with detailed timelines and measurable objectives. This was my chance to introduce myself properly to the entire company and outline my vision for our integrated future. The conference room filled quickly. I recognized most of the faces from my department meetings, but there were many people I hadn't met yet. The atmosphere was typical for these corporate gatherings, polite attention mixed with the underlying hope that the meeting wouldn't run too long. David Walsh opened with his usual updates on quarterly performance and industry trends. Then he introduced me. "As you all know, the acquisition of Morrison Consulting has brought us not only new capabilities, but also exceptional leadership. I'd like to introduce Charlene Morrison, our new Chief Operations Officer, who'll be presenting our integrated strategic roadmap." I stood at the front of the room, clicked to my first slide, and began outlining our plans for operational excellence. The presentation was going well. I could see people taking notes, nodding at key points, and asking thoughtful questions about implementation timelines. That's when Brandy struck. During the Q&A portion, she stood up in the third row, her posture aggressive and her expression challenging. I have some concerns about these initiatives, she announced loudly enough for the entire room to hear. Of course. What would you like to discuss? I replied professionally. Well, for starters, how can someone who's been hiding in remote work for 3 months possibly understand what this company actually needs? The room went dead silent. I mean, real leaders show up. They don't manage from their living rooms. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. David Walsh shifted uncomfortably in his front row seat. Several executives exchanged worried glances. I appreciate your question, Brandy, I said, keeping my voice level. The remote work period was a strategic decision to allow for proper integration of our client portfolios and operational systems. Every initiative I've presented today is based on comprehensive analysis of both company strengths and opportunities. But Brandy wasn't finished. She continued standing, her voice growing louder and more confrontational. That's exactly the problem. You're making decisions based on spreadsheets and theories instead of real-world experience with our teams and our culture. How can you possibly know what changes are needed when you haven't even been here? The discomfort in the room was palpable. People were looking down at their notebooks, at their phones, anywhere but at the confrontation unfolding in front of them. Furthermore, Brandy continued, I think we need to ask some tough questions about whether the acquisition team really understands what made this company successful in the first place. Are we just going to throw away everything that worked to implement some outsider's vision? David Walsh tried to intervene. Brandy, perhaps we could discuss these concerns in a more appropriate forum. But Brandy interrupted him. The CEO of the company. No, David. I think these questions need to be asked publicly. The people in this room deserve to know whether their jobs are secure, or if we're all just waiting for the axe to fall. The room was frozen. I could hear the air conditioning humming, papers rustling as people shifted nervously in their seats. This was unprecedented. A mid-level manager publicly challenging both the COO and CEO in front of the entire company. I mean, let's be honest, Brandy continued, her voice dripping with false concern. Morrison Consulting probably got acquired because it was failing, right? Why else would a successful firm sell out? And now we're supposed to trust that same failed leadership to fix our company? That crossed a line I couldn't ignore. Brandy, I said, my voice sharp enough to cut through her monologue. Morrison Consulting was acquired because we were the most profitable firm in our sector. The acquisition happened because Meridian Industries recognized our value and wanted to integrate our capabilities. As for leadership accountability, I'd be happy to discuss performance metrics with you privately after the meeting. But she wasn't backing down. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Someone questions your approach, and immediately it becomes about private meetings and veiled threats. That's not transparency. That's not the kind of leadership this company needs. The meeting had completely derailed. What was supposed to be a strategic presentation had become a public confrontation that was making everyone in the room deeply uncomfortable. Finally, David Walsh stood up. This meeting is adjourned. Department heads, please stay for a brief follow-up discussion. Everyone else, thank you for your time. People filed out quickly, avoiding eye contact and speaking in hushed tones. But I noticed something interesting. While most people seemed embarrassed by what had just happened, a few employees, particularly younger ones, were watching Brandy with expressions that looked more like fear than admiration. After the room cleared, except for senior leadership, David Walsh addressed what had just occurred. That was completely inappropriate, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Brandy, what you just did was unacceptable. You don't challenge senior leadership in a public forum like that. I was asking legitimate questions, Brandy replied, still defiant, questions that people in this company have been thinking, but haven't been brave enough to ask. No, said Jennifer Martinez from HR. What you did was create a hostile and disrespectful environment. That's not how we conduct business here. Operations Director Lisa Parks spoke up. Brandy, I've been in meetings with Charlene all week. Her knowledge of our operations is comprehensive and her recommendations are sound. What you just did was way out of line. But what happened next surprised everyone. Instead of backing down or apologizing, Brandy doubled down. I see what's happening here, she said, looking around the room at the other executives. The new regime is closing ranks. Anyone who asks tough questions gets labeled as disruptive or disrespectful. This is exactly what I was worried about. She gathered her materials and headed for the door. I hope everyone in this room remembers this moment when employee morale starts tanking and good people start leaving because they don't feel like their voices matter anymore. And with that, she walked out, leaving the remaining executives in stunned silence. David, I said quietly, we need to talk. That afternoon, I met with David Walsh and Jennifer Martinez in David's office. I laid out everything I'd discovered over the past 2 days: the falsified credentials, the pattern of employee abuse, the systematic destruction of careers, the fear-based management style that was driving away talent. This goes way beyond a personality conflict or cultural adjustment, I explained. We have a manager who's been lying about her qualifications, terrorizing subordinates, and undermining company operations. And what happened in that meeting today shows she's escalating her behavior. David listened grimly as Jennifer added her own observations about the pattern of employee departures and informal complaints. The question, David said finally, is what we do next. We need to handle this properly, by the book, with full documentation. I agree, I said. But David, after what happened today, other employees are watching to see how leadership responds. If Brandy can publicly disrespect senior executives without consequences, it sends a message that this kind of behavior is acceptable. Jennifer nodded. I recommend we begin formal disciplinary proceedings immediately. We have enough documentation to support action, and today's incident provides clear evidence of insubordination. As we discuss next steps, I realized that Brandy's public attack had actually done us a favor. By challenging senior leadership so blatantly in front of the entire company, she'd crossed a line that even her most sympathetic colleagues couldn't defend. She'd also revealed something important about her psychological profile. When threatened, she became reckless. Instead of trying to defend her position quietly or address concerns professionally, she'd chosen nuclear confrontation. That impulsiveness was about to become her downfall. But first, I had a feeling she was going to make one more desperate play, and I intended to be ready for it. Thursday morning arrived with an urgent email from Jennifer Martinez. Emergency meeting in my office at 8 a.m. Bring David. Brandy has filed a formal complaint. The three of us sat around Jennifer's conference table, reading through the most audacious document I'd encountered in my professional career. Brandy had filed a detailed complaint, alleging that I was creating a hostile work environment specifically targeting her. According to her written statement, I was engaging in systematic harassment and intimidation of long-term employees. She claimed that my investigation into departmental performance was actually a witch hunt designed to eliminate people who weren't part of the acquisition clique. She cited our first-day encounter as evidence of my aggressive and unprofessional behavior toward existing staff. But the most creative part of her complaint focused on Monday's all-hands meeting. She framed her public confrontation as asking legitimate questions about leadership accountability, while characterizing my responses as threatening and retaliatory. She claimed that my comment about discussing performance metrics privately was actually a threat of retaliation for her speaking truth to power. She's positioning herself as a whistleblower, Jennifer observed, scanning the document. Someone who courageously stood up to ask difficult questions and is now being punished for it. David shook his head in disbelief. This is unbelievable. She turns a strategic presentation into a public attack, then claims she's the victim when we try to address her behavior. The complaint also included character references from 3 colleagues who vouched for Brandy's dedication to the company and concern for employee welfare. I recognized the names, all people who worked in departments adjacent to Brandy's influence, but not directly under her supervision. She's been preparing for this, I realized. The public confrontation wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. She knew we'd have to respond, so she got ahead of it by filing her own complaint first. Jennifer nodded grimly. It's actually a smart strategy. Now, if we take disciplinary action, she can claim it's retaliation for filing a legitimate workplace complaint. So what do? David asked. We follow proper procedures. Jennifer replied. "We investigate her claims thoroughly and professionally, but we also continue building our own case based on documented facts and employee statements." That's exactly what we did. Over the next 3 days, Jennifer and I conducted a methodical investigation that would have made any employment attorney proud. First, we reviewed security footage from the past 6 months. The recordings revealed a pattern of behavior that contradicted multiple statements in Brandy's complaint. We found footage of her berating subordinates in public areas, interrupting meetings to challenge other managers, and yes, blocking the main entrance on at least 4 previous occasions to have lengthy personal phone conversations. The footage from Monday's incident was particularly revealing. It clearly showed that I had approached politely and spoken quietly, while Brandy had immediately escalated to shouting and dramatic gestures. The security guards later confirmed that my behavior had been professional throughout the entire encounter. Next, we reached out to employees for formal statements about the workplace environment. Jennifer was careful to make these requests confidential and voluntary, emphasizing that we wanted honest feedback about management practices across all departments. The response was overwhelming. Within 48 hours, we had formal written statements from 12 employees detailing specific incidents of abuse, intimidation, and unprofessional behavior. Madison Taylor provided a particularly damning account of how her project proposals had been systematically buried while she was given negative performance reviews for lacking initiative. But the breakthrough came from an unexpected source: the accounting department. Robert Chen contacted Jennifer on Friday afternoon with concerns about expense irregularities. His team had been conducting routine quarterly audits when they noticed patterns in Brandy's submitted expenses that didn't align with company policy. "She's been submitting personal meals and entertainment as business expenses," Robert explained, spreading receipts across Jennifer's desk. "Dinners at expensive restaurants with no client documentation, concert tickets charged as relationship building, a spa weekend claimed as a strategic planning retreat." The total amount was staggering: over $8,000 in questionable expenses over 18 months. Each receipt had been properly submitted through the corporate system, but none included the required documentation proving business necessity. "Why didn't this get caught earlier?" David asked. "The amounts were under the threshold for automatic review, and her supervisor signed off on them," Robert explained. "But when we looked at the pattern over time, it became clear that she was treating the corporate expense account like a personal slush fund." Jennifer made detailed copies of every receipt, cross-referencing them with Brandy's calendar and client schedules. The evidence was irrefutable. She'd been systematically defrauding the company while positioning herself as a model employee. Meanwhile, something interesting was happening among the general staff. Word had gotten out that HR was conducting interviews about workplace environment, and people were coming forward voluntarily to share their experiences. An administrative assistant named Karen Martinez told Jennifer about being screamed at for allegedly losing documents that were later found in Brandy's own files. A junior analyst named Tom Bradley described being publicly humiliated in a team meeting for asking a clarifying question about project requirements. But the most damaging testimony came from someone I hadn't expected: one of Brandy's own character references. Marketing coordinator Sarah Lopez had initially provided a positive statement about Brandy's work ethic, but after learning about the formal investigation, she contacted Jennifer to revise her statement. "I felt pressured to write something positive," Sarah admitted during a private meeting. "Brandy told me that the new COO was targeting loyal employees and that I needed to demonstrate my commitment to the team. She implied that my job might be at risk if I didn't support her." This revelation led to a broader discovery. Brandy had been actively lobbying colleagues to provide character references, framing the investigation as an attack on all existing employees rather than an examination of her individual conduct. But her strategy backfired. Instead of rallying support, her pressure campaign made people realize how manipulative and calculated her behavior really was. Several employees who had initially felt sympathetic toward her began questioning whether they'd been manipulated all along. By Friday evening, we had assembled a comprehensive file documenting a pattern of abuse, fraud, falsification of credentials, and systematic manipulation of colleagues. The evidence was overwhelming and meticulously documented. Jennifer prepared a formal recommendation for immediate termination based on multiple violations of company policy: insubordination to senior leadership, creating a hostile work environment, expense fraud, falsification of credentials, and intimidation of colleagues. The documentation is ironclad, she assured David and me. Even if she tries to claim retaliation or wrongful termination, we have enough evidence to defend our decision in any legal proceeding. David reviewed the file one more time. How do we handle the termination? Tuesday morning, Jennifer replied. First thing. Clean and professional, with security standing by. As I drove home Friday evening, I reflected on how quickly everything had unraveled for Brandy. Her attempt to get ahead of the investigation by filing her own complaint had actually accelerated her downfall. By forcing us to conduct a formal investigation, she'd given us the framework to uncover evidence that might have taken months to discover otherwise. Her public confrontation at the all-hands meeting had demonstrated her lack of judgment and respect for authority. Her pressure campaign for character references had revealed her manipulative nature. Her expense fraud had provided clear grounds for immediate termination. But most importantly, her behavior had finally given other employees permission to come forward with their own experiences. People who had been afraid to speak up individually found courage when they realized they weren't alone. Brandy had spent 2 years building a carefully constructed facade of professional competence while systematically destroying the careers and confidence of people around her. But facades, no matter how carefully built, eventually crumble when exposed to enough light. And on Tuesday morning, that light was going to shine very brightly indeed. Monday morning felt different as I walked through the Meridian Industries lobby. The security guards nodded respectfully. Employees smiled and said good morning, and I realized that the atmosphere of tension that had hung over the building for the past week was finally beginning to lift. But the day brought an unexpected development that changed everything. At 9:15 a.m., Jennifer Martinez called an emergency meeting. When I arrived at her office, I found her with Robert Chen from accounting and a woman I didn't recognize, a serious-looking person in her 50s, wearing a tailored suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Charlene, this is Angela Foster from our external audit firm, Jennifer explained. Robert discovered something this weekend that we need to discuss immediately. Angela opened her briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents. Miss Morrison, we've been conducting routine financial audits across all departments. During this process, we discovered irregularities that go beyond the expense fraud we previously identified. She spread several pages across Jennifer's conference table. It appears that Miss Brandy has been manipulating budget allocations within her sphere of influence. Over the past 18 months, she's redirected funds from approved projects to create what essentially amounts to a slush fund for discretionary spending. The numbers were staggering. Brandy had systematically underfunded legitimate marketing initiatives while creating new budget categories that she controlled directly. The total amount exceeded $50,000. How was this possible? I asked. She exploited a gap in our approval process, Robert explained. For projects under $10,000, departmental managers have discretionary authority to reallocate funds between budget categories. She created multiple small reallocations that looked routine individually but formed a significant pattern when viewed collectively. Angela continued. She used these funds to pay for what she classified as strategic consulting and relationship-building initiatives. But when we examined the vendor invoices, we found payments to companies that either don't exist or were fronts for personal services. What kind of personal services? Interior decorating for her apartment, personal fitness training, a luxury vacation to Napa Valley that she claimed was a competitive intelligence gathering trip, Angela listed, her voice professionally neutral but clearly disapproving. Jennifer shook her head. So we're looking at embezzlement, not just expense fraud. That's correct, and there's more. Angela pulled out another set of documents. We also discovered that she's been manipulating performance metrics for projects under her supervision. When initiatives succeeded, She inflated the results to enhance her own performance reviews. When they failed, she minimized the numbers to avoid accountability. The scope of Brandy's deception was breathtaking. She hadn't just been abusing employees, she'd been systematically defrauding the company while manipulating data to enhance her own reputation. "Angela, what's our legal exposure here?" I asked. "Significant. If this had continued undetected, the financial losses could have reached 6 figures annually. But the documentation we've uncovered provides clear grounds for criminal prosecution if you choose to pursue that path." Just as we were absorbing this information, Tracy knocked on Jennifer's door with an urgent expression. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's something happening that you need to know about," she said, glancing nervously at the assembled group. "Several employees have come forward with formal statements about Brandy's behavior. But more importantly, someone has provided evidence that she's been retaliating against people who spoke to HR." "What do you mean?" Jennifer asked. "Madison Taylor received an email from Brandy this morning, sent from her personal account, threatening her job if she continues spreading lies about management. 2 other employees received similar messages. This was the final straw. Not only had Brandy been embezzling company funds and abusing employees, but she was now attempting to intimidate witnesses in an active HR investigation." Jennifer immediately contacted our legal department, who advised that Brandy's retaliation attempts constituted both a violation of company policy and potential criminal witness intimidation. "We're not waiting until Tuesday," David Walsh declared when we briefed him on the developments. "This ends today." At 2 p.m. Monday afternoon, David, Jennifer, and I met with Brandy in the main conference room. Security Officer Dan Reynolds stood discreetly near the door, while Angela Foster remained available by phone to address any questions about the financial irregularities. Brandy entered the room with her usual confident demeanor, carrying a folder of documents and wearing the expression of someone who believed she was about to turn the tables on her accusers. "I assume this is about my workplace complaint," she began, settling into her chair. "I hope we can resolve this professionally and get back to focusing on what's best for the company." David opened the meeting with characteristic directness. "Brandy, this meeting is to inform you that your employment with Meridian Industries is being terminated immediately, effective today." The color drained from Brandy's face. "What? You can't do that. I filed a legitimate complaint about hostile work environment. This is clearly retaliation." Jennifer slid a formal termination letter across the table. "Your termination is based on multiple violations of company policy, all of which have been thoroughly documented and investigated." Brandy snatched up the letter and scanned it quickly. Her confident expression crumbled as she read the specific charges: insubordination to senior leadership, creation of hostile work environment, financial fraud, falsification of credentials, and witness intimidation. "This is ridiculous," she sputtered. "These are trumped-up charges designed to silence someone who asked tough questions about leadership." "Brandy," I said calmly, "we have documented evidence of expense fraud totaling over $8,000. We have bank records showing embezzlement of company funds exceeding $50,000. We have recordings of you intimidating employees who participated in the HR investigation. These aren't trumped-up charges. These are serious violations that could result in criminal prosecution." For the first time since I'd known her, Brandy was speechless. Jennifer continued, "You have 15 minutes to gather your personal belongings from your office. All company equipment, including laptop, phone, and access cards, must be turned in immediately. Security will escort you during this process." "You can't do this to me," Brandy said, her voice rising. "I've been loyal to this company for 2 years. I've hit every target, exceeded every goal. You've also terrorized your colleagues, driven away talented employees, and stolen company funds," David replied. "Loyalty isn't compatible with fraud and abuse." Brandy tried several more arguments, claiming the evidence was fabricated, threatening legal action, demanding to speak with board members, but the documentation was irrefutable and the witnesses were numerous. As security escorted her out of the building, I watched from my office window. Other employees also watched, some from windows, others from the lobby, but instead of sympathy for a colleague being terminated, I saw relief on people's faces. relief that the nightmare was finally over. Within an hour of Brandy's departure, the change in office atmosphere was palpable. People were talking more freely, laughing more easily, and participating more actively in meetings. It was like a dark cloud had lifted from the entire building. Madison Taylor stopped by my office at the end of the day. "Miss Morrison, I just wanted to thank you for listening and for taking action. A lot of us had given up hope that anything would ever change. Madison, I owe you an apology. Talented people like you should never have to endure that kind of treatment in the workplace. Can I ask you something? How did you know to keep investigating even when she tried to turn it around on you?" I thought about that for a moment. Because the evidence didn't match the narrative she was trying to create. When someone's story doesn't align with documented facts and multiple witnesses, you keep digging until you find the truth. That evening, as I finally felt settled in my role as COO of Meridian Industries, I reflected on the past week. Brandy's downfall hadn't just been about terminating a problem employee. It had been about restoring justice and dignity to a workplace where good people had been suffering in silence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight, for the first time since starting this job, I felt genuinely optimistic about the future we were building together. Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. sharp, I stood in the main conference room, watching Jennifer Martinez and David Walsh prepare for what would become a defining moment in Meridian Industries' corporate culture. The termination letter lay on the mahogany table, its contents representing not just the end of one person's employment, but the beginning of a new chapter for dozens of employees who had suffered in silence. Except Brandy was already gone. Monday's emergency termination had brought immediate closure to a situation that could have dragged on for weeks. But the real work, rebuilding trust, restoring morale, and creating systems to prevent future abuse, was just beginning. The first positive change came within hours of Brandy's departure. Madison Taylor submitted a formal request to present her client retention strategy to senior leadership. The same strategy that had been buried for months was now moving forward with full support. "I've been afraid to speak up about my ideas for so long," Madison confided during our Tuesday afternoon meeting. "I started thinking maybe I really wasn't cut out for strategic work." "Madison, that couldn't be further from the truth. Your analysis is sophisticated and your recommendations are exactly what this company needs," I assured her. "In fact, I'd like you to present this to the board next month." The transformation rippled throughout the organization. Employees who had been requesting transfers decided to stay. People who had been quiet in meetings began contributing actively. The survival mode group chat evolved into something positive, an employee resource group focused on professional development and workplace improvement. By Wednesday, Jennifer was fielding requests from employees who wanted to contribute to new policy initiatives. People were volunteering for challenging projects, offering innovative solutions, and demonstrating the kind of engagement that had been suppressed for 2 years. "It's remarkable," Jennifer observed during our weekly leadership meeting. "Productivity is up, collaboration is improving, and employee satisfaction scores have jumped 20% in just 1 week." David Walsh nodded approvingly. "Charlene, the investigation and resolution of this situation has sent a clear message throughout the organization. We value good people, and we won't tolerate abuse of power." But the most meaningful change was personal. Walking through the office, I saw something that hadn't been there before. People looked up when I passed. They made eye contact. They smiled genuinely. The atmosphere of fear and tension had been replaced by something I could only describe as hope. 3 weeks later, we held our next all-hands meeting. This time, the energy in the room was completely different. Instead of uncomfortable silence and nervous glances, there was active engagement and thoughtful discussion. I presented our updated strategic initiatives, incorporating several ideas that had emerged from employees who were now free to contribute without fear of retaliation. Madison's client retention strategy was a centerpiece of our new approach, projected to save the company over $400,000 annually. During the Q&A, employees asked substantive questions about implementation, timelines, and opportunities for advancement. The contrast with the previous month's meeting was striking. This was what a healthy workplace looked like. "One more thing," David announced as the meeting wound down. "I want to recognize the courage it took for many of you to come forward during our recent workplace investigation. Your willingness to speak truth to power has made Meridian Industries a better company for everyone." The applause was spontaneous and heartfelt. 6 months later, the transformation was complete and measurable. Employee turnover had dropped to below industry average. Our client satisfaction scores had improved significantly, driven by teams that were now empowered to solve problems creatively. The company received local recognition as one of the best places to work in Minneapolis. In my acceptance speech at the award ceremony, I emphasized that great companies aren't built by tolerating abuse of power, but by creating environments where everyone can contribute their best work. "Leadership isn't about protecting your position or maintaining control," I told the audience of business leaders. "It's about empowering others to succeed and ensuring that talent is recognized and rewarded regardless of office politics." The investigation had also led to important policy changes. We implemented new financial controls to prevent expense fraud, enhanced background verification for all management positions, and created multiple channels for employees to report concerns without fear of retaliation. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural. Meridian Industries became a place where asking questions was encouraged, where challenging ideas led to better solutions, and where treating colleagues with respect was not optional. It was fundamental to continued employment. Madison Taylor was promoted to senior marketing strategist within 4 months, with a salary increase that reflected her actual contributions rather than the artificial barriers that had been placed in her path. Several other employees who had been held back by Brandy's manipulation also received overdue recognition and advancement. As for Brandy herself, the financial fraud investigation led to criminal charges. The district attorney's office found sufficient evidence to prosecute for embezzlement and falsification of business records. She eventually pleaded guilty to reduce charges and was required to make full restitution to the company. But more importantly, her case became a cautionary tale throughout our industry about the real cost of toxic leadership. It wasn't just about financial losses or legal exposure, it was about the human cost of allowing abuse to continue unchecked. A year later, as I reflected on that chaotic first week at Meridian Industries, I realized that the morning Brandy blocked the office entrance had actually been a gift. Her immediate attempt to establish dominance had revealed her true character and set in motion the investigation that ultimately saved dozens of careers. The lesson I learned, and the one I hope to pass on to other leaders, is this. When you encounter workplace toxicity, you have a choice. You can look the other way and hope someone else deals with it, or you can stand up and do what's right, even when it's difficult. Great companies are built by people who choose to fight for justice, protect the vulnerable, and create environments where everyone can thrive. Sometimes the hardest battles are the most important ones to win. The morning I walked into Meridian Industries as the new COO, I thought I was just starting a new job. Instead, I learned that sometimes the most important thing a leader can do is simply refuse to let good people suffer in silence. And that lesson has shaped every decision I've made since. Have you ever had to stand up to a toxic colleague or boss who was making life miserable for others? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories about standing up for what's right in the workplace. Thank you for listening, and remember, your courage to speak up might be exactly what someone else needs to see that change is possible.